Don't touch me, you stupid black girl. The words hit harder than the slap that never came. They shattered the quiet elegance of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills like a gunshot in a library. They sliced through the clinking of silverware, the soft jazz from the live band, the muted conversations of millionaires and power players. Everyone froze. Every eye turned. Every phone quietly tilted into record mode. Charles Drake, billionaire CEO of Drake Nova Technologies, didn't flinch. He adjusted his cufflinks, annoyed that his tailored jacket now bore a few drops of spilled Bordeaux. Naomi Ellis stood motionless, a folded cloth still in her hand, a bottle of water in the other. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. What Charles Drake didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that Naomi wasn't just any waitress working a high-stakes investor dinner. She was Elliot Strauss's daughter. Adopted at 7. Graduated top of her class. Former track athlete. Now moonlighting at a luxury hotel, not because she had to, but because she chose to. To observe. To learn. To expose. Charles didn't just insult a black woman. He insulted the most important person in the room. And he did it with cameras rolling and the future of his $3.5 billion deal hanging by a thread. This isn't just a story about ego. It's a black story. One about power, prejudice, and the quiet strength of someone who's been overlooked too many times, until tonight. Because what happens next will change everything. This isn't fiction. It's a cautionary tale wrapped in truth. And if you've ever been underestimated, belittled, or told your voice didn't matter, you'll want to stay for every word. And if you believe respect should never be optional, hit that like button so more people hear this. Because tonight, the waitress was royalty. And the man who thought he owned the table? He was about to be served the most expensive lesson of his life. Naomi Ellis was not born into comfort. She was born into resilience. At just 26 years old, she had lived through more than most people twice her age. Her mother passed away when Naomi was still in high school. Cancer. Quick. Ruthless. The kind that does not knock, it barges in, steals everything, and leaves nothing behind but hospital bills and silence. Her father had never been in the picture. And so, the day after the funeral, Naomi became both sister and mother to a 10-year-old boy with cerebral palsy. His name was Elijah. His smile could light up a city. His needs were endless. But to Naomi, he was everything. She had once been a college track star, full scholarship, dreams of Olympics and endorsements. But reality does not care about dreams. Bills piled up. Rent came due. So she walked away from the podium and into the workforce. 3 jobs. 6 days a week. 2 overnight shifts. All to keep Elijah in a good school and ensure his physical therapy sessions never stopped. Naomi never complained. Never posted vague quotes about struggle. Never asked for pity. She believed in doing the hard things quietly. The world did not need to hear her cry. It needed to see her grind. Her face was striking, almond eyes, soft skin, a jawline that hinted at strength even when her voice was soft. People often underestimated her. She let them. Let them think she was just another black girl behind a tray. Let them think she was invisible. Because sometimes, invisibility is armor. Her shift at the Four Seasons was not out of desperation. It was intentional. She had turned down easier jobs, quieter positions. But working the elite floor, where the world's most powerful men wined and dined behind crystal and gold, gave her something money could not. Access. And more importantly, insight. Naomi watched. She listened. She learned. She saw how power moved in silence. She saw how kindness was rare. And how cruelty disguised as confidence was often applauded. But most of all, she learned that the people who are ignored the most often know the most. So when Charles Drake insulted her in front of a room full of kings, Naomi did not flinch. Because queens do not react. They remember. And then, when the moment is right, they rise. Charles Victor Drake did not believe in apologies. He believed in leverage, in dominance, in silence used like a weapon. The kind of silence that fills a room after someone makes a mistake, just long enough for them to feel the weight of your disapproval. That was his favorite kind of power. At 38, Charles had clawed his way to the top of the tech world. CEO of Drake Nova Technologies, a company that started in his college dorm and became a billion-dollar giant in less than a decade. Innovation. Sure. But Charles didn't credit innovation. He credited control. He didn't build his empire by being liked. He built it by being feared. The man had a reputation. Ruthless in negotiations. Unforgiving in boardrooms. The kind of leader who fired people not for failing, but for hesitating. To him, hesitation was the enemy of results. And weakness. Unacceptable. Inside the walls of Drake Nova, employees whispered his name like a storm warning. Some admired him. Most feared him. But all of them obeyed him. Charles believed business was war. And in war, you don't make friends. You make casualties. His public image was curated. Sharp suits, sharper language. He gave interviews about disruption and leaning into discomfort. But what he never said on camera was what he believed in private. People are tools. Tools are only useful if they work. So when he walked into the ballroom at the Four Seasons that night, Charles didn't see people. He saw chess pieces. Elliot Strauss, the billionaire investor from San Francisco, was the king he needed to impress. Everyone else? Pawns. Background noise. Including the waitstaff. Especially the waitstaff. Charles never looked servers in the eye. Never said thank you. Never paused to consider how someone carrying a tray might one day carry a vote, or a voice, or something much more dangerous. He was arrogant, but not stupid. He studied power moves. He knew how to read a contract like a poker hand. But what he never learned, what he never valued, was character. And on this night, that blind spot would cost him everything. Because the girl he dismissed as background noise? She was the headline. And he was about to become the cautionary tale no one would forget. The ballroom shimmered like a scene from a dream. White linen draped over mahogany tables, candles flickering in crystal holders, and the quiet hum of a string quartet waving through the air like silk. It wasn't just another dinner. It was the dinner. The kind of event where billion-dollar futures were whispered over appetizers. Where alliances were sealed with wine and broken with a smirk. The kind of room where one wrong word could shift markets, or make someone vanish from the Forbes list by morning. Tonight's guest list was a gallery of power, venture capital legends, legacy media moguls, a U.S. senator or two hiding behind designer ties. But all attention centered on just one man, Elliot Strauss. Strauss wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. At 72, the German-born investor was a quiet storm in a world full of thunder. His capital firm, Strauss Holdings, had backed some of the most successful and ethical ventures in the past 20 years. But what made him dangerous wasn't his money. It was his silence. He spoke rarely. But when he did, people moved. And tonight, he was considering investing $3.5 billion into a full acquisition of Drake Nova Technologies. The buzz around the room wasn't about the food. It was about whether Charles Drake would close the deal. Naomi Ellis stood just steps away from all of it. Dressed in a crisp uniform, hair tied back, posture flawless, she moved like background music. Present, essential, but unnoticed. She knew the rhythm of the elite. Knew which glasses to refill first, which guests preferred sparkling over still, which ones made eye contact and which ones didn't. And she knew tonight was different. She could feel the tension in the air. It clung to her skin like humidity. She had memorized every table assignment. She'd spent 2 days reviewing Strauss's dietary preferences and Charles's favorite wine pairing. She was prepared. But she hadn't prepared for what was about to happen. Charles Drake sat at table 1, his back straight, his confidence overflowing. Elliot sat across from him, calm, unreadable. Their entourages flanked them on either side, nodding at every word. Naomi approached the table with a bottle of Chateau Margaux. Her steps were steady. Her hand did not shake. She leaned in, ready to pour. And that's when the glass tipped. And the room changed. The wine glass didn't shatter. It didn't need to. It tipped, slow, deliberate, as if guided by fate. Deep red Bordeaux spilled like blood across the white tablecloth, crawling toward the cuff of Charles Drake's $1,000 suit jacket. A few drops landed on his custom monogram. Naomi reacted instantly. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said softly, already reaching with a cloth napkin. It was instinct. Reflex. Years of experience kicking in. But Charles Drake didn't see service. He saw an offense. And he didn't speak like a man addressing a mistake. He spoke like a king addressing a peasant who dared step on marble. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words were surgical, precise, cold, designed to cut through flesh and dignity alike. The entire table froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered inches from mouths. The quartet in the corner let the final note hang in the air, unsure whether to continue or vanish into the wallpaper. Naomi stood still, napkin in hand, eyes lowered. She had heard worse in the past. Quiet jabs. Offhand comments. A joke whispered too loud when people thought she was just part of the furniture. But this was different. Because this time, the room had heard it too. Charles didn't apologize. He didn't even look at her. He reached for a new napkin as if swatting away a mosquito. One of his junior executives laughed under his breath, awkward, nervous, trying to pretend the moment wasn't radioactive. Naomi didn't move. And that silence, that stillness, was louder than any shout. Across the table, Elliot Strauss set down his fork. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. But his gaze shifted to Charles with the weight of a gavel. Naomi finally stepped back. "Please enjoy your meal," she said, voice even, calm. Not a single note of anger. Only something deeper, resolve. Around them, the room struggled to restart. Small talk resumed, but it was mechanical, forced. Phones buzzed quietly. Some recording. Some sending messages. The damage was done. But not to Naomi. The real crack, the one no one could unhear, was beneath Charles Drake's feet. And by the time he realized it, he was already falling. Elliot Strauss didn't move. While others shifted in their seats, cleared their throats, and awkwardly adjusted their collars, he remained completely still. The kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that says, "I saw everything. And I don't forget." At 72, Elliot had seen men like Charles Drake his entire life. Different suits. Different names. Same arrogance. He had grown up in post-war Berlin, raised by a mother who had survived more than most would believe. She taught him the value of silence, not his weakness, but as strategy. When someone tells you who they are, she used to say, "Watch. They always show their truth when they think no one important is watching." Tonight, Charles had shown his truth. And unfortunately for him, someone important was watching. Naomi had handled the moment with a grace beyond her years. Her tone had been calm, her movements measured. But Elliot had noticed the tension in her shoulders. The pause behind her eyes. The way her breath caught for just a second longer than usual. He recognized that pause. He had lived that pause. It was the pause of someone deciding whether to break or to rise. And Naomi had chosen to rise. He admired that. But more than admiration, he felt something else. Confirmation. Naomi had insisted on working this job herself. He had offered her comfort. A consulting position. A leadership role. She declined every one. She said she wanted to understand how American business really worked, not from a boardroom, but from the basement. Now he understood why. Charles Drake had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. Elliot leaned toward his assistant and whispered in German, "It's time." The assistant nodded and stepped away from the table, phone already in hand. Elliot didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to stand. Power doesn't shout. It watches. And when the moment is right, it moves. Charles, still oblivious, resumed talking, laughing too loudly, trying to brush the moment under the velvet rug of high society. But Elliot wasn't brushing anything away. He was writing it down, in memory, in principle, and soon, in action. Because when character is tested in public, consequences should follow in public, too. And Elliot Strauss had just made up his mind. The courses kept coming, but the appetite was gone. Steaks arrived on plates hot enough to steam. Delicate sauces drizzled like art. Glasses refilled automatically, wine flowing like it was still a celebration. But no one at table one was celebrating anymore. Elliot Strauss sat with his hands folded, his knife untouched, his eyes heavy with silence. Charles Drake, meanwhile, kept trying to recover the room with shallow confidence and louder than usual laughter. He leaned into his pitch, speaking fast, speaking hard. "You know what separates winners from whiners?" he asked, his voice slicing through the table like a poorly timed toast. "Winners get over distractions. They focus. They dominate." His executives nodded too quickly. The kind of nods that say, "Please, just move past this." Elliot didn't nod. He just picked up his water glass, took a single sip, and set it back down without breaking eye contact. Naomi returned to the table with quiet precision. Her tray held the next course, roasted duck, perfectly timed, perfectly plated. She served Strauss first, then his assistants. Then the other investors. Drake last. That small detail didn't go unnoticed. Charles watched the pattern, jaw tight. He made no effort to thank her. Instead, he muttered under his breath, "Still learning her place, I see." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She placed the last plate on the table with the same care she'd shown all night, then turned to refill the glasses. Elliot observed her. The way she moved with poise, even when the air around her felt like a storm gathering. The way she offered a soft smile to the elderly couple at the next table. The way she picked up a crayon that had fallen to the floor and handed it gently back to a child nearby. This wasn't just service. This was grace under pressure. And Charles Drake, for all his power, couldn't recognize it. He only saw someone beneath him. Someone to be corrected, dismissed, ignored. "Let's talk numbers, Mr. Strauss," Charles said suddenly, trying to pivot the moment. 3.5 billion. Full integration within 2 quarters. We'll double your ROI in under 18 months. Elliot tilted his hand. "Before we discuss numbers," he said calmly, "I prefer to observe values." A chill moved through the table. Because in that sentence, Elliot made it clear. This dinner wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about character. And Charles Drake had just failed the first course. It was supposed to be routine. Naomi approached the table again, this time with a water pitcher. The tension in the room had shifted, no longer sharp, but dense. Heavy. The kind of atmosphere that settles over a room when people pretend nothing happened, but everyone remembers everything. She moved with practiced ease, refilling glasses with quiet precision. No wasted motion. No misplaced emotion. She had served hundreds of tables like this. Dozens of men like Charles Drake. But this wasn't just another dinner. She reached the far end of the table, Charles's end. As she tilted the pitcher toward his glass, his hand shot out. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just grabbed her wrist. Tight. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to send a message. "You wait until I finish speaking," he hissed, his voice low, his breath thick with wine. "When real business is happening, you don't interrupt. You stand still. Like the help is supposed to." His grip lingered. The room didn't stop this time. No one gasped. No one dropped a fork. But eyes turned. People noticed. Naomi met his stare. Calm. Controlled. Not shaken. Not small. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her tone neutral but unbreakable. "I understand completely." Then, gently, without force, she pulled her wrist from his grasp and stepped back. Charles blinked, as if surprised she hadn't flinched, as if disappointed that his intimidation didn't land. But Naomi didn't retreat. She simply moved to the next guest, her movements as smooth as ever, her dignity intact, her voice silent, but louder than anything else in the room. Elliot Strauss placed his silverware down again. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned to his assistant and said just 2 words, in German. "It's time." The assistant nodded, stood, and disappeared through the side door. Charles went on talking, still trying to sell himself like nothing had shifted. But something had. And everyone at the table knew it. Because it wasn't just about spilled wine anymore. It wasn't even about the insult. It was about the repeat offense. The kind of offense that says, "This isn't a mistake. This is who I am." And now, that truth was no longer whispered. It was witnessed. And consequences were no longer a matter of if, only when. Charles was still talking when Elliot Strauss rose from his seat. He didn't make a speech. Not at first. He simply stood, slowly, quietly, like a storm gathering weight before thunder. His movement alone was enough to silence the table. The room followed his lead. Conversations faded. Silverware paused midair. Even the waitstaff along the wall seemed to freeze, sensing that something irreversible was about to unfold. Elliot looked at Naomi. She met his eyes, steady, calm, unreadable. Then, with a nod that felt both like permission and acknowledgement, he turned back to the table. "Mr. Drake," Elliot said, his voice even, almost gentle. "Before we move forward, there is someone very important I'd like you to meet properly." Charles frowned, confused. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "You're referring to one of your VPs? Or your general counsel?" Elliot didn't answer him directly. He raised one hand instead, gesturing toward the back of the room. From the far wall, Naomi stepped forward. No tray in hand. No apron on her waist. Just the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to hide, and everything to reveal. She stopped beside Elliot, not behind him. Beside him. "This," Elliot said, resting a hand gently on her shoulder, "is Naomi Ellis. My daughter." The air cracked like glass under pressure. She was adopted when she was 7. She chose to keep her birth name. But make no mistake, she is my daughter. And I am every bit her father. Charles blinked once. Then again. His lips parted, but no words came. "Naomi has been working here," Elliot continued, "not because she needed the income, but because she wanted to understand, firsthand, how people in power treat those they think are beneath them." Elliot turned slightly, facing the rest of the room now. "Tonight, you all witnessed exactly that." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A quiet murmur rippled through the guests. Phones tilted higher. Eyes widened. The silence was thick with realization. Naomi stood tall, her chin lifted. Not triumphant, just truthful. Just seen. Elliot looked at Charles one last time. "The girl you called stupid is the woman I raised to be wiser than most CEOs I've ever met." And in that moment, the deal wasn't just in jeopardy. It was already dead. The sound of a chair scraping back shouldn't feel like an earthquake, but tonight, it did. Elliot Strauss returned to his seat without another word. The room was still. Charles Drake remained frozen, his forced smile now cracked, his confidence drained from his face like color from a dying light. Then it started. One guest pushed back their chair and stood up. Then, another. And another. A ripple of movement spread across the room, quiet but undeniable. Phones vibrated. Notifications lit up screens. Some guests began checking their investment apps. Others simply walked out. The Strauss acquisition was unofficially dead, but publicly understood. And Charles Drake was still standing there, not realizing his empire had just lost its foundation. Elliot's assistant returned, whispering something into his ear. He nodded once. That was all it took. Less than 15 minutes later, headlines began hitting financial news outlets. Strauss pulls out of Drake Nova deal after public incident. Billion-dollar tech CEO faces backlash over racist comment. Investor's daughter called stupid by Drake. Deal terminated on the spot. By the time dessert was served, though no one touched it, Drake Nova stock had already begun to plummet. 17% down in less than an hour. Then, 22. Panic calls flooded Charles's phone. Board members, legal advisors, PR reps, investors demanding statements, demanding explanations, demanding someone else in charge. But there was no spin big enough to bury what the world had just seen, and what had just gone viral. The moment was now a trending video. Shared, clipped, reposted. Memes followed. Headlines intensified. Screenshots spread like fire in dry brush. Within hours, sponsors were pulling contracts. Strategic partners were issuing statements of deep concern. Talent at Drake Nova began resigning in waves. The company Charles built was unraveling, not from poor strategy, not from bad tech, but from the rot at its core finally being dragged into the light. Arrogance had a price. And tonight, it was $3.5 billion plus the collapse of everything Charles thought he controlled. At 11:47 p.m., the board voted to suspend him. At 12:14 a.m., his access to company servers was revoked. By sunrise, Drake Nova wasn't a powerhouse anymore. It was a headline in the business section under a single word. Fallout. The sun hadn't even cleared the skyline when Naomi Ellis stepped into the Strauss Holdings headquarters. No longer in uniform. No tray in hand. No badge that read, service staff. She wore a tailored blazer, navy blue with soft shoulders, and flats that meant business, not burden. She wasn't just walking into a new building. She was walking into the next chapter of her life. Waiting for her in the executive wing was a new nameplate. Simple. Sleek. Pangerson. Naomi Ellis, Director of Corporate Humanity. The title wasn't decorative. It wasn't a symbolic gesture meant to smooth over headlines or calm investors. It was real. Created at Elliot Strauss's insistence. Funded with full decision-making authority. And given to a woman who had seen the best and worst of leadership from the ground floor. She sat at her desk for the first time with a steady breath, letting it all settle in. The calls, the chaos, the collapse. But also, her choice. Her voice. Her place. Not given. Gone. Later that afternoon, she stood at a company-wide live stream. Employees from San Francisco to Singapore tuned in. Some had only seen her face through viral clips. Others had worked alongside her, never knowing who she truly was. Now, they would. She stepped to the mic. Yesterday, she began, I was called stupid. Not because I made a mistake, but because someone believed their title made them more human than me. A pause. I said nothing in that moment. But today, I choose to speak. The room, virtual and physical, was silent. There's a difference between power and leadership. One is taken. The other is earned. I didn't take this seat. I was trusted with it. And I intend to honor that trust. Her voice remained calm. No anger. No revenge. Just truth. I believe in companies where people are valued, not just for what they produce, but for who they are. I believe every role deserves dignity, every title deserves accountability, and every voice, especially the quiet ones, deserves to be heard. Applause filled the room. Not polite. Not corporate. Real. Because in Naomi, they didn't just see a new leader. They saw a mirror. And finally, a future. What happened that night in the ballroom wasn't just about one CEO and one waitress. It was about all of us. It was about how we treat people when we think no one's watching. How easy it is to value resumes over respect, titles over truth, and power over people. But here's the thing, someone is always watching. And not just with a camera. Sometimes, it's a child at the next table. Sometimes, it's a colleague at the edge of the room. Sometimes, it's the very person you think has no voice, no name, no consequence. That night, Charles Drake didn't lose a deal because of numbers or strategy. He lost it because he failed the simplest test of character, treating another human being with basic dignity. We all face that test every day. At the drive-thru, in a meeting, on the phone with someone who speaks broken English, in the elevator with someone we think can't help our career. Those are the moments that define us, not just as professionals, but as people. And Naomi? She reminded us of something we forget far too often. That strength can be quiet. That dignity isn't given, it's lived. That real leadership isn't about who talks the loudest, it's about who listens the most. So maybe the next time we feel the urge to dismiss someone, to look past them, to say something small but cutting, we pause. And we ask ourselves one question. If that person turned out to be the one holding the pen over our future, would we be proud of how we treated them? Because sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are not the ones at the head of the table. Sometimes, they're the ones clearing it. And if you believe that too, if you believe dignity should never be optional, and that every person has value, then share this story. Let someone else hear it. Let them remember that being decent isn't extra credit, it's the baseline. Because in the end, how we treat people is the real legacy we leave behind. And it starts with you and me. Right now.